All right, welcome back. Today's lesson is going to be on regulation, um, and let's jump right into it. The first thing we are going to do is talk about the history surrounding why regulation came to be needed in the first place. So let's go all the way back to the early days of our country in 1776. So in the United States history, from 1776 until about the late 1800s, many people were self-supportive. They worked off the land. They gathered food from the land. They planted crops that gave food to themselves. They went out and hunted and fished. They built their own houses. And if they could not get something, they went to trading posts or markets where people would trade with them for materials that they would need. So there was no need for business, or there were no business owners. Everybody was their own business owner and their own boss, and everybody lived off of the land. However, from the mid 1800s to early 1900s, uh, the globe, really, the every country on Earth, every industrialized nation on Earth experienced a time of industrialization. This, in the United States, this was due in large part to a couple inventions. The first of which being the steam engine. Let me get my pen up. The first of which being the steam engine, which was powered by coal, which made coal mining very, very important. And those combined helped make the railroad, along with this, which is a picture of the Bessemer steel process. The process by which steel could be made very quick and efficiently. So combine all these things together and you come up with industry. Okay, we have industries now um, made out of the ability of us to build things and transport it across country. Now, with the rise of these industries, came people that started businesses and started hiring people to work in their businesses. They did at that time whatever was necessary to gain money. So down here we have John D. Rockefeller. He was the oil tycoon of the time. He is still, when you adjust for inflation, by far the richest person to ever live. Right after that, you have Andrew Carnegie, who was the steel magnate of the time, who really created a monopoly in the steel industry. You have Andrew Vanderbilt, who was the railroad man, and you have William Randolph Hearst, who was the newspaper man. So you had these business owners, forward thinkers for their time, beginning big businesses, employing a lot of people, and making a ton of money. At the same time, the problems overseas led to huge influxes of immigrants coming into this country through our east coast, mainly Ellis Island. Okay, so you had all these people coming in, and we saw a huge population boom, more than we've ever seen in our country's history or past. So you have really three factors leading to an issue. First, we saw a big transition from everything being made in the home and by the hand to things being produced by machines at factories. Second of all, you had a huge population boom, which created this transition from the entire nation being really country and not having a lot of people living on the land to the influx of cities, and you had huge cities growing where a lot of people would live. And then lastly, you had business owners who, wanting to make money, would treat workers poorly, would create products in unsanitary conditions, and lie about the products that they would produce. Now, those are the causes. The result was that unions were created. Unions were created, which unions essentially are workers, groups of workers banding together to fight the poor treatment by employers. And what we saw as a result is we saw very violent um, strikes. You had situations where you had the Pullman strike in Chicago and the Haymarket strike. You had these strikes where workers were fighting against business owners, demanding better wages and better treatment. And the business owners would pay the city police officers or National Guard to try to get these people out of their way and back to work. And fights broke out, and violence would break out, and people were killed. At the same time, we had the publishing of Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, which outlined the horrible, horrible setting in which meat products in Chicago were made. And Upton Sinclair went into these meat markets, or where meat was produced, and he watched as rats would crawl over and defecate on, and people would cut fingers off into meat, and flies would be on the meat, and all these horrible, horrible things. And then that meat would get sold, and people would eat it. And he wrote about all these things in this book, The Jungle. So you see this kind of backlash from certain individuals and certain groups to the poor treatment and poor products being created by industry. Well, to balance this out, the government stepped in and they began regulating or providing regulation. Regulations are just laws or rules by which people have to play. And we saw regulation, laws and rules placed into the 5 main pillars of industry in our country, and that's advertising, labor, environment, privacy, and health. So those are the 5 main areas in which we saw regulation. In advertising, most of the regulation placed down had to do with honesty in advertising, with the biggest coming in 1966 with the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. Before that, you could make any claim on packaging that you wanted to. I could make some loaves of bread, and on the packaging it could say, this could cure cancer. And I could get away with it. There were no laws against that. However, to protect consumers from buying products that maybe had harmful agents in it, or just simply from buying things where the labels lied about the products, there was a regulation put into place on fair packaging and labeling. Also, we have the environment, and the biggest way that environmental regulations came to be is through an agency called the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. They put all kinds of regulations into or on industry, mainly in regards to the output of certain pollutants or the dumping of certain materials into waterways. And it's all aimed to protect the environment and to decrease our carbon footprint. The third is labor. And when you hear the word labor, what you mean is treatment of workers or workers. So you had the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, and the Immigration and Nationality Act as 3 representatives of labor regulations. Now, early in the 1900s, what you saw is situations where workers were forced to work 18, 20 hours at a pop. They weren't paid very much. There were certain instances at companies where people would die because of how much they were working, or the hours that they were being asked to work. Children were working. it was really a world in which business owners were taking advantage of employers because no rules were put into place. So all of these things, so the Fair Labor Standards Act produced an 8-hour work day, 40-hour work week in many industries, and then asked that enforced that people be paid a certain wage and above that wage if those hours were exceeded. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act ensured that all workers would get some kind of pension given the industry and given how long they had been with the company. And the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed to ensure that companies would not discriminate against employees. As far as privacy goes, the main way in which privacy regulations have changed the way that the United States function is through health and financial records. You may or may not know this by your age, but there are certain things that your parents cannot know about you. If you go to the doctor and they ask you certain questions, your parents, after a certain age, cannot ask the doctor what you told them. Same thing with financial records. Somebody can't just call up the bank and find out how much money you have stored away. So there are regulations, rules in place for who is privy to that information. And then lastly, safety and health. The biggest regulation, the biggest overseer of regulations is OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's a government agency that's in charge of making sure that the workplace is a safe workplace. The biggest achievement of OSHA, or to create OSHA, was the Safety and Health Act of 1970. The goal of that act was to create standards by which people could go to work and not have to worry about incurring injuries as a result of poor working conditions. Now you may think, or many people may think, this is a really, really good thing. We're going to talk about how there are both sides, as there are with many issues. There's two sides to every issue. This is good because it is great for consumers. Regulation is great for consumers. You don't have to worry about being lied to by producers. You know what you're getting, and you can choose to do pretty much whatever you want with your money without having to worry about wasting it away on phony products. It's also good for workers. Okay, workers know that they're guaranteed a certain wage. They know that they are only going to be working certain hours. They know that their boss cannot take advantage of them to a certain extent. And that's important for many people. However, many people would argue, on the other hand, that regulation has gone too far, and that it has now a drastic impact on our economy. And I'm going to show you how that argument can be made. So what we're looking at here, once again, is our supply and demand curve. Let's say that this is the supply and demand curve for a coal plant. So this is coal energy. Let me just draw some lines here. Alright, so this is coal energy, and let's say this is a market without regulation. So this is the market without regulation. And actually, here, let me change my colors. So this is our demand schedule without regulation, and this is our supply schedule without regulation, or demand zero, supply zero. Anytime you see a supply and demand curve where there's multiple lines, there's going to be a zero under. It always starts at zero, then we'll go 1, 2, 3 to show changes in a market. At this market, unregulated, let's just say the price for energy is just about $3. And at $3, they can produce 1 megawatt. Not sure if that equates at all, um, but let's just use those numbers. So the EPA comes in and they decide that the coal industry is polluting the air too much. And they put in sanctions that say that the coal industry has to stay between a certain amount of money or a certain amount of pollutants into the air. Now, the impact on that is going to be the coal companies are going to have to spend a lot of money to ensure that they are not polluting the air. When they spend that money, that is going to increase the cost of production. When the cost of production goes up, as we know from our supply and demand curve, they are going to be able to produce less of a product. So we're going to see a shift of the demand lower down the quantity scale. So this will now be supply 1. After the change, so this was our unregulated market. After the change, we have a new supply curve that is shifted to the left. Now, under this market, we now have a new equilibrium price of about, let's say, $3.75, and we have a new equilibrium quantity of, let's say, about 0.75 megawatts. So now, because of the regulation, the companies are producing less coal energy and consumers are paying more for that energy. Well, if consumers are paying more for that energy, they're going to begin using less. If they begin using less of that energy, it's going to go down. Okay? And what you'll see here is the equilibrium price will want to go down, but now the quantity has almost been cut in half. If the companies that produce coal are now producing at a level half as much, they're going to begin firing people. They're going to fire a lot of their workers because they only need about half as much to stay in business. If they fire, let's say, half of their workers, that's very bad for bad for the economy. Okay? And so that is the argument that a lot of people make, that the negative impact of regulation is that too much regulation leads to a loss of jobs. Because as you see, it's a 3-step process. Okay? We're looking at our initial demand and our initial supply. If the regulations are put into place, the producer has to pay more to supply. So that shifts the supply curve to the left, which will raise the price to the consumer, which will cause them to demand less, which will cause the supplier to need to produce a significantly less quantity. And to produce that quantity, they will need to fire a lot of their workers. And if they fire the workers, that is a loss of jobs. All right. So that is all I have for you as far as regulation is concerned. I hope this sheds some light on what regulation is, how it has come to be, how it can be a positive and negative. And now what you're going to do is read some articles of the many opinions out there about regulation, and you're going to critically think for yourself and determine for yourself just how good or how bad regulations can be. As always, if you're really lost and you're struggling to understand this, let me know. I'm here for you. I'd be happy to help you out. Until then, have a good day.